So, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you to the American Academy in Berlin. We have a lot of wonderful guests here tonight, and I'd like to say a special thanks to our friends from Daimler for underwriting Peter our event tonight. So we thank you very much. Tonight is sort of the kind of American Academy story that we like to talk about because Esra was a fellow here at the American Academy in 2006. And if Richard Holbrook were alive, he would love to hear this story. Esra came here to the Academy with a project that centered around Turks converting to Christianity. And instead, she ended up, after being here for a semester, studying Germans converting to Islam. So her project took a complete turn, and that's exactly what we like to think, that people come away from here more informed about what they're doing and what others are doing. So, Esra, welcome. We're very happy to have you. There's, of course, this is a top. We all have many friends who have written books, and all of my friends say timing is everything. And Esra's timing, even though you've spent 9 years writing this book, your timing is perfect. Timing and luck seems to be one of the determinant factors of a popular book. And the fact that we're all now faced with these terrible images coming from ISIS or from Paris or from Pegida here, we're all facing this topic, and it's of course interesting to try to understand it. In her book, Being German, Becoming Muslim, Race, Religion, and Conversion in the New Europe, which of course she'll be talking about tonight, Esra explores how an increasing number of Germans convert to Islam and how they manage to balance their love for Islam with their society's fear of it. Esra will speak first, and then joining Esra in a conversation will be Yasmin Schumann. Yasmin is head of the Academy programs at the Jewish Museum here in Berlin since 2013. One of the aims of her program is to establish to establish a Jewish Islamic forum and to promote in particular exchange and networking amongst minorities. Yasmin has also written a book, Weil ihre Kultur so ist, Narrativ des Anti-Muslim Rassismus. So thank you for joining us tonight, and I will turn it over to you, Esra, to present your book to us.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me here to come give this talk. It's a really very meaningful opportunity for me to talk here today, because I started doing this research 9 years ago, right here. As you were told, I had no intention to work on Germany. When I was here, I casually asked around whether there were German converts to Islam. A newly found friend held me by the hand and took me to a couple of German-speaking mosques which housed many German converts to Islam. And I was really fascinated by the people I met first. Some of them are here today. I'm very honored to have their company. And I couldn't keep myself from going back and back again, asking more questions, learning more. And soon it was clear to me that this is the book that I want to write. At the end of my 4-month stay here, I gave a presentation that compared German converts to Islam to Turkish converts to Christianity. This very room was full, and the audience kept asking me questions after questions. At the time, I didn't have answers to many of the questions. But I wasn't going to let these questions go, and After I went back to the United States, immediately I applied for more fellowships. I came back here, stayed for 2.5 years, then I came back, I stayed for another year, and then I felt confident that, okay, I have some understanding of the dynamics of this community. Okay, so today it is estimated that there are 100,000 German converts to Islam, even though we're not sure about the number because there is no one who is keeping the numbers. But the number is comparable to number of converts in the United Kingdom and France. So it's not that there are more German converts to Islam compared to other European countries. And even though there are so many converts to Islam, and even though Europeans, including Germans, have been converting to Islam for hundreds of years, converts to Islam generate a deep astonishment and suspicion. So I spent more than 3 years with German converts to Islam in Berlin, talked to close to 100 converts from different genders, age, and income groups, previous religious affiliation, East and West German background. I spent countless hours in German-speaking mosques, participated regular learning, praying, and family fun events. I hang out at halal restaurants, frequented Islamic clothing stores, and visited German-speaking Muslims at their homes. I met a few people only once, that's how it is in research, many others regularly at mosque events, and some of them became close friends who made my life richer. The leading question of my research was the relationship between race, religion, and belonging in Europe. Despite centuries-long presence in the continent, Islam is increasingly seen as external to Europe. It is judged as a distinct set of values that belong to newcomers who cannot integrate. I wanted to know what would experience of indigenous Europeans who embrace Islam add to discussions of Islamophobia, anti-Muslim racism, and externalization of Islam. I wanted to understand what choosing Islam entailed in a country where more than 50% believe that there are too many Muslims in the country. And what would be the consequences of individual conversions for German society, Muslim communities, and their relationships to each other? So I'll tell about these in a minute. When they ask about my research, most people want to know why Germans convert to Islam. And I was asked this very question during the dinner as well. My answer to that is, it is not possible to why they or anyone would convert, in the sense that it is not possible for most of us to know why exactly we choose our partners to share our lives with. Even when we feel like we know why, the reasons we'll attribute will change through decades, and this is the same with converts. What we can know, however, is how they come to contact with Islam, a necessary but not sufficient condition. Almost always, Germans, and other Europeans for that matter, convert following a meaningful contact with Muslims. It is important to note that most of the time, the Muslim they met is not a practicing Muslim. Sometimes it is, but not always. Relationships are established during holidays, at work, school, and sometimes at nightclubs. In the most typical story, a non-Muslim man or a woman meets a Muslim man, mostly man, gets inspired by some qualities of their personality. Most typically recorded characteristics are their commitment to friendship, generosity, their family ties, and sometimes their sure stance towards the existence of God and his message. Overwhelming majority of converts I met reported that they developed a desire to learn more about Islam following such an encounter, regardless of the fact that the Muslim they met was religious or not, or whether even they had a conversation about religion or not. Having an intimate or a meaningful encounter with a Muslim, many times a nominal one, was what opened these people's hearts to Islam, and they began researching about Islam, a religion they all told me that they had heard about but knew little on. This research sometimes began by asking the new Muslim friend about it, but is most often done alone on the internet. Interestingly, I noted unless the original Muslim friend also devoted himself to Islam, the relationship between the new Muslim and the old Muslim came to an end, and most often, the convert continued their spiritual path alone, establishing new relationships. Because it is almost always dependent on personal contact, the history of conversion to Islam in Germany is also the history of Muslim integration in Germany. For more than 100 years, men and women, old and young, rich and poor, gay and straight, religious and atheist, Christian and Jewish, Protestant and Catholic, indigenous or immigrant Germans have been embracing Orthodox and Sufi, Shi'i, and Sunni interpretations of Islam. So this is a long history and a huge diversity of conversion. Different kinds of Germans have encountered different kinds of Muslims at different historical moments. Those involved in Muslim and German encounters at any particular time have largely shaped the vision of Islam that German converts embraced. For example, in the 1920s, because Muslims of Berlin were Muslim students, and the Ahmadiyya Society, which dominated the Muslim scene then, was organizing literary meetings for open-minded intellectuals and literary types, converts consisted of a well-educated elite, including Orientalist scholars, aristocrats, and professionals. German-speaking converts to Islam also included Jews who had come into contact with Islam during their travels to Palestine, and sometimes through their contact with Muslims in Germany. Guest workers who arrived in the 1960s to build up German economy changed the scene of Islam and converts. These workers were overwhelmingly single men. Despite their isolation in factories and worker dormitories and their lack of access to German language, they struck up romantic relationships with German women. Some of these meaningful encounters initiated conversion, and in this period, more women than men converted to Islam. By the 2000s, the dynamic changed once more. Even though older trends of conversion continue, today there is a new cohort of converts who are young, increasingly male, lower class, and of Germans of color compared to previous periods. These young men, also many women, convert to Islam through contact with native-born Muslim friends with whom they drink alcohol, smoke marijuana, and enjoy graffiti and hip-hop. As Islam becomes further marginalized and criminalized in German society, it becomes attractive for some marginalized non-Muslims. German youth with diverse backgrounds who live in the affordable peripheries of big cities in Berlin like Neukölln and Wedding, where I did most of my research, convert to Islam. These neighborhoods are home to many Turks and Arabs, along with poor white native Germans and non-Muslim immigrants from Russia, East Europe, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Islam is increasingly an integral part of a new and ethnically mixed youth culture in Germany and throughout Europe. The significant increase in the number of converts since 2000s went hand in hand with the global rise of Salafism. Unlike other ethnically based mosques in Germany, Salafi ones are eager to attract and accommodate new Muslims and teach their interpretation of Islam in the German language. My historization of Islam in Germany demonstrates its democratization. One way of reading this history is an index of Islam's declining value. As the perceived value of Islam decreased in Germany, the socioeconomic background of the converts did too. In other words, the more marginalized Islam became, the more people from marginal segments of German society found it attractive, even though there is variation, but as an overall trend. Yet, a closer look at German conversion trends also leads to another more positive interpretation. Whereas in the early 1900s, there were only a handful converts, today there are many, many more. Conversion to Islam is almost always a result of meaningful relationship between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, and affects the lived experience of both native Germans and migrant Muslims, as well as the definitions of these terms. Hence, the dramatic increase in conversion shows what an inseparable part of German society Muslims are. As Muslims have been transformed through their migration to Germany, they also transform German society, at the very least increasing the number of individuals who embrace Islam in fundamental ways. In this process, Islam has become an unquestionably national religion in Germany. I did the research for this book between 2006 and 2014. This is a time when Muslims are part and parcel of German society, and at the same time, there is increasing Islamophobia. German converts to Islam face the double challenge of accommodating Islam to German identity and carving out legitimate space for Germans in the Ummah, the global community of Muslims. As Muslims were increasingly racialized and marginalized, both proved to be difficult tasks. Mainstream society marginalizes German converts to Islam and questions their Germanness and Europeanness based on the belief that one cannot be a German or European and a Muslim at the same time. Converts to Islam are accused of being traitors to European culture, internal enemies that need to be watched, and potential terrorists. Having become new Muslims in a context where Islam is seen as everything that is not European, ethnic German converts disassociate themselves from Muslim migrants and promote a supposedly denationalized and detraditionalized Islam that is not tainted by migrant Muslims and their national traditions, but instead goes beyond them. Some German Muslims, along with some other European-born ethnic Muslims, promote the idea that once cleansed of these negative characteristics, the pure Islam that is revealed fits in perfectly well with German values and lifestyles. Some even argue that practicing Islam in Germany builds on the older but now lost values of the German Enlightenment, including curiosity about and tolerance of difference. For East Germans who converted after the fall of the Berlin Wall, becoming Muslim can be a way of escaping their East German identity. Born Muslims who grew up in Germany increasingly adopt these discourses and promote deculturalization of Islam as a way for Muslims to integrate into German society without giving up their religious beliefs. At the same time, a newer and more popular trend of Islamic conversion, named Salafism, bypasses the questions of national tradition and identity altogether by ostensibly going back to the earliest roots of Islam, with converts isolating themselves not only from non-Muslim society, but also from other Muslims. One of the main arguments of this book is that the call of many German and other European-born converts for a purified Islam and also attractiveness of Salafism can be best understood in the context of increased xenophobia and Islamophobia, where being Muslim is defined as antithetical to being German and European. When confronted with unexpected hostility from mainstream society, converts to Islam take an active role in defending the place of Islam in Germany by disassociating it from the stigmatized traditions of immigrant Muslims. German Muslims take on a purified Islam. Their take on a purified Islam is inspired by Islamic revivalism worldwide, but is also based on Enlightenment ideals of the rational individual and natural religion, which are very European ideas. While this call for a culture and tradition-free Islam that speaks directly to the rational individual seems universalistic, in the contemporary German context, it ends up being strictly particularistic or even Eurocentric. It assumes that the European or the German mind is truly rational, and hence the Oriental mind is not. This mind, free of the European mind, free of the burden of cultural traditions, and is hence uniquely capable of appreciating and directly relating to the real message of Islam in its essential form. This tension, I argue, is one of the reasons why Salafi interpretations of Islam is increasingly popular among new Muslims in Germany. This Puritan interpretation of Islam, that is conversionist, literalist, anti-culturalist, and anti-historical, is attractive to both converts and born-again Muslims, since it places them on an equal footing with, or even better, makes them feel superior to all other Muslims. This is especially powerful in a context where immigrant Muslims are routinely accused of being misogynistic, violent, uneducated. And Salafism allows new converts to fully embrace their religion without having to deal with cultural traditions and ethnic groupings. It even permits them to feel superior to Muslims with immigrant backgrounds and invite them to true Islam, which is not Turkish, Arab, or Pakistani. That is why Salafi mosques are the only Muslim spaces in Germany where piety matters more than ethnic or national background. There are a couple of other places like that, but Salafi mosques lead the way. So as my conclusion, converts to Islam break ground for genuinely new ways of being and becoming Muslim, German Muslim, and Muslim Germans. At the same time, they provoke new anxieties about the changing realities of being European. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me to discuss such an insightful and important book in an under-researched field. And thank you, Esra, for your keynote. I would like to start with something that you told me before, namely your experience with the difficulty to find a German publisher for your book, because you portray the converts in a too normal way. And I was wondering if this has not only to do with the public discourse concerning converts, but also with a specific perspective that academia holds on this issue. Would you agree that in the research on conversion, there is a tendency to focus on converts as deficient personalities who compensate some sort of lack, personal issues, or maybe through conversion into a new religion, and that this focus has somehow or has a somehow pathologizing view on converts?
Yes, definitely. As Yasmin was mentioning, my publisher, Princeton University Press, sent a book to about 10 German publishers. They were all enthusiastic at first. And then I'm told they read the book and they said, oh, but here converts appear so normal. We wanted a book that shows how dangerous they are. I took it as a compliment. I'm sad that no one wants to publish it in German so far. But you're right. It is, maybe it has something to do with Germany, the role of religion in society here. So first, being open about your religion is not that much welcomed, and then maybe choosing something different. Now having lived in different countries, compared to the US and the British context, here this act of choosing is also not as much part of the culture. And it is the other dimension, as you said, is that there is psychological approaches to conversion dominate the field. There are many books, but they approach converts as these individuals, and they just look at the psychological processes they went through. And it is seen always as a response to a trauma. There's a big literature about complicated relations with fathers. in my view, everyone goes through traumas. Who doesn't have a complicated relationship with their father? And at the end, very few of them convert. So I wanted to look at it, more as a social thing.
In your book, you describe the different phases on conversion to Islam in Germany, starting with the Weimar Republic. You mentioned it in your keynote. If we focus on this very early stage, can you tell us whether discussions on the relation between Germanness and Muslimness, national identity, belonging, were evident at that time as well? And if so, where do you see differences to the current discussions in Germany among converts and also maybe in the wider public?
This argument about why Islam is a good German religion has been discussed heavily also in 1920s. I'm not a historian, I know the contemporary period better, but I'm also seeing under the influence of Romanticism, nationalism, ideas of national character were also dominant at the time. And some of the arguments still survive to today. How, actually Islam is this pure religion that is, it is more true to the message, so it actually fits the European mind better, that is almost like deism. Those ideas were popular also in the 1920s. But I think then there was not a counter argument that emphasized how, there was not a big Islamophobic movement then. So those people wrote about these ideas in these journals and they wanted to attract people. But I don't think the counter argument wasn't so strong at the time.
So the question of the contradiction between being German, becoming Muslim was not an issue that much, would you say?
I would say so. I mean, 1920s, I think, was also a very experimental time. People were experimenting with different things, so Islam was one of them.
Exotism, maybe, as well, Orientalism as an...
Right.
You mentioned that these converts before World War II, that they were mostly intellectuals.
Yes.
And then the next period of conversion start with the arrival of the so-called guest workers to Germany. Can you say more about the role of class, maybe, and also gender with regard to converts to Islam in Germany in these different historical periods?
Yeah. I mean, what I have seen is that contact is the precondition for conversion. It is not the only condition. So then who had contact to Islam was determined by other things. Before, at the beginning of 1900s, those who could travel to the Middle East could have contact. Those who could study and learn about Orientalism. So you had to be wealthy, and that is why you have some Jews who traveled to Palestine, and there they had contact with Muslims. And after that, Muslims came to Germany, and working class people came. And then working class people had more contact with working class people. And a lot of the people who came were male. A really important dynamic behind conversion is students. I think students also speak the German language. They're more mobile than workers. Workers, worked in shifts. They stayed in these heims. So students played an important role. And lately, I think this shows that Muslims are really now well integrated into German society. Now it happens a lot through best friend relationships, and the age of conversion has fallen down. I met lots of 15, 16-year-olds who converted. They told me I was inspired by my best friend. We were hanging out in school. So it is always contact. So then the question is, who can have meaningful contact to Muslims? that is the class dimension. And then the gender dimension
Yes,
is
the gender dimension
is Muslim students for a long time have been more men, and I think they are also more mobile. You know, there are so it was easier for them to establish relations with German women. It also guarantees easier integration into German society. It gives you higher chances of learning better German. And many of the times they were not practicing Muslims, but the relationship inspired the women to convert. But now there are more and more men converting through friend relationships. So it's always actually Muslim men initiating the conversion, or not initiating, but mediating.
So the gender and also the age plays a role, right? You said that you looked on conversion to Islam also as a kind of current youth culture.
Yes.
And where especially, I mean, you mentioned it, but maybe you can elaborate more on that. What makes Islam and maybe specifically Salafism currently so attractive for young underclass non-Muslims? Because it's not only white German converts young male, or not only male, but who converts to Salafism, but also we had this famous rapper, Desert Dog, who is now a fighter in Syria. So people of color, or from other minority background, converting to Islam is, maybe you could.
Yeah, definitely. Right now, it is Islam is part of a global youth culture. And there are many scholars out there who discuss the connections between the African American youth culture and this global Muslim culture. There are lots of cross-fertilization, lots of, let's say African American and Arab motifs are mixed. They say Islam is the official language of hip-hop right now. And there is definitely an element of kind of rebellious revolution, resistance against the West. So I really did look for it because I thought it would make a good story. So maybe the story in Germany is different from what is happening, let's say, in France, in the UK, and in the US. So I really try to look for political motivations. You know, I really wanted someone to tell me, yes, you know, I want to, there were some people who said I always felt myself close to underdogs. I always felt for people who are oppressed. You know, they brought explanations like that. But for most of the time, it was a more individual spiritual journey. That, you know, it wasn't revolutionary slogans, but it was this spiritual journey. But at the same time, what gets, what is seen as attractive, or what opens the heart, is important. What young people feel comfortable with.
Maybe we can come back to this aspect later when we will discuss the issue of Islamophobia and Islam as a non-white, non-European religion. But I would like to come back to the opening quote of your book, which is, and I quote now, "I would never have become a Muslim if I had met Muslims before I met Islam." So from the analysis in your book, we can understand that this statement, or we can understand this statement as a desire to distance oneself from native-born Muslims at a time where being Muslim is rather, or has a rather negative image in society. And you also describe the argumentation for separating religion and culture for this purpose. And my question is, how do converts who argue in this way deal with the fact that the public and also the academic discourse, in the public and also in the academic discourse, religion and culture is highly entangled? I mean, or to put it out in other words, how does religion without culture looks like for them, and how does it work?
Yeah, this is a complicated issue, I think, analytically, how you differentiate between culture and religion. But now there are many European Muslims, both converts and also born Muslims, who make that argument that these are two different things, that there is culture and there is religion. I mean, obviously, Islam is a universal religion, so it traveled to many places. So, if it can go to Malaysia, why can it come to Europe? So they make that separation. Obviously, as Islam travels, it carries some parts of Arab culture, be it language, but then at the same time, it fits into its local context also. It happens everywhere. But what I found unique here is that this separation gets influenced by the already existing racisms here. So then sometimes I would find myself talking to a German Muslim, and they would be making arguments that actually it is the Muslims here who prevent Islam from spreading, because they would say, because, they lie, they take too much money from social welfare, they don't work hard enough, they would list all these stereotypes. And because of that, Islam gets a bad name. So we have to fight against that. And they would say, as I just said, actually it fits with the German character better, because we're honest.
So this would be a German Islam, and honors, very punctual, or what? I don't know
Yes,
what kind
yes,
of what
yes,
kind of
yes.
what is the Islam? What is the German version of Islam in the view of these people?
Right.
Who were...
Yeah. So that was a big discussion in the circles that I have been. Some people would say, well, actually, my mother doesn't live that much of a different life from me either. She doesn't go drink every night. She doesn't gamble. She doesn't go to nightclubs. So, some people would say maybe there is nothing really that contradicts between German life and Islam. That is also true. But some people would make more like taking out the bad parts. Oh, honor killings. That is associated with Arabs and Turks. It is bad, but actually it doesn't belong. Or oppression of women. That is cultural. So everything that is bad associated with Turks and Muslims. So if we take all of those, what is left is this perfect Islam. But then this perfect Islam happens to be a perfect fit for the German culture or the European culture, which is this universal, or the right way of connecting to God. So that is where I had the most struggle, because I somehow imagined, to find German Muslims who would be identifying with immigrants, but I found that connection is a little bit fragile. I mean, many do identify with them. They also suffer from the racism there, especially women who wear the headscarf. Many times I was surprised to realize that for the first time they noticed how racist German society is, because when they wear the headscarf, they're treated as a Turkish or an Arab woman. And at the same time, the local or the immigrant Muslim communities also do not embrace converts. There is another tension, which also makes this unification difficult. Many people told me, I thought when I wear the headscarf, people will embrace me, that I'll become one of them. But most of the time, immigrants said, oh, mashallah, how cute. But they wouldn't do anything more. So then many converts are left in the middle. The mainstream society says, what have you done? This is treason. Who do you think you are? And then the Turks and Arabs says, you're cute, but you're a little strange, I don't know what to do with you, then they have to, I don't want to make fun of, but just to, make a caricature out of it, then they try to carve a space for themselves also.
I mean, this was not the focus of your work, but maybe you can give us your impression. What did you notice how native-born Muslims react to this strategy of distancing oneself from immigrant Islam, but by cleansing it from inferior culture? I mean, they notice, right?
Yeah, they do notice it, but there is a huge Europe-wide movement like that. There are also many born Muslims who also really embrace this thing. They say in order to become European Muslim, we have to leave our culture behind. We have to leave Moroccan ways, Turkish ways behind, and they try to create this Muslim sphere where ethnicity doesn't matter. So this movement brings different Muslims together, but at the cost of, in my view, reproducing racism against some of the cultural traditions.
If we look at the role of converts within the Muslim community in Germany, one can probably assume, and I think you mentioned it very briefly, that converts played a significant role in establishing mosques and a religious infrastructure in the late 70s and 80s, at a time when the first generation of immigrant Muslims were unfamiliar with the structure of German society and the ways in which it functions, and they also lacked language competence. So, what's your opinion on their role today? Would you say it has changed in the course of time with the second and third generation of Muslims with a migrant background becoming more integrated and also more self-esteemed?
I observe that converts still play a prominent role in intermediary roles. I think they take it on themselves. They feel the need to explain it to people why they have done it. I also sometimes found that they find it difficult to face the exclusion, discrimination. I think when you are born with it and grow with it, it becomes part of life. But I've seen new converts getting annoyed and demanding halal food at a restaurant. Why can't they even know what the meaning of this word is? They are a little bit more demanding, I think, because they're not socialized in this role of expecting less. But it is not only Muslims, but I would go to interfaith dialogue meetings, and it would be a German convert to Judaism on the table, a German convert to Buddhism, a German convert to Islam, they all representing these communities and speaking to each other. So I think it falls on the shoulders of converts to have these dialogues.
Okay, so the interreligious dialogues, you would say, are mostly led by converts?
Definitely.
I see, okay. I mean, one very important aspect of your book, and we talked a little bit about it, but is the question of Islamophobia. And among scholars working on prejudices and racism, there is the assumption that Islam that Islam has become a highly racialized religion in Western societies where Muslims form a minority, and that Islam is seen as a non-European, non-white religion. So could you elaborate on what this means for white converts to Islam? What are maybe also the specific stereotypes and discrimination that they face? And maybe also what are the implications for people of color converting to Islam in Germany? And we talked a little bit also about the US context, African Americans converting to Islam. Maybe you could relate to this.
Yeah, definitely. especially for women who wear the headscarf, then they are perceived as non-white. And it is a big fall, and people really feel it. People told me these detailed accounts. Overnight, I became invisible. Overnight, people started speaking to me very loudly and slowly, as if I cannot understand them. Or when their mothers, school teachers say things like, oh, probably because of your home environment, this child is not doing well. They just assume because they're Muslim, they said they are stupid, uneducated. There is that dimension. With women, there is also, I think, this other racist element of why, because it's assumed that they married or they had a relationship with a Muslim man. How dare you slept with a Muslim man? I think there is that element also. I heard from other people, for example, when a German woman has a child with a Muslim man, even if she didn't convert, then it is difficult for her to find a white German boyfriend. So it is, in a way, it is polluting in terms of thinking about old racial categories. So women definitely experience a fall, whereas men can hide it. Or I have met people, they think they have the Muslim symbols, they have a little beard, they're wearing a silver ring, but I also see that no one notices it.
Passing.
They pass. I mean, you have to really work on it to make it very obvious. Whereas if you are a person of color, I didn't meet too many people of color here converting to Islam because of the demographics. But what we can think equivalent to is lots of East Europeans are here and they convert to Islam. But of course, they are again white. So in terms of racial dynamics, I don't know, but it is definitely then they're, in a way they get out of their marginalization because then they become a European Muslim. Or with East Germans, I experienced that, especially the people who right after the fall of the wall converted. It was a way for them to get out of their East Germanness, but now they became Muslim German. Then they became marginalized in another way.
I mean, would you say that, because this is one of the assumptions that so-called native-born Muslim, I mean, this is an interesting category to distinguish. It is absolutely non-Islamic, right? To distinguish between born Muslims and converts. I mean, this is not a religious, from the religious, Maurice, would you say, the self notion or awareness. But would you say that Islamophobia in Europe or also in the United States, when it comes to Muslims with an immigrant background, it has something to do with racism, and when it comes to converts, it's more a religious intolerance? Can you?
Or racism is something, Islamophobia is of course there's all this debate, right? Is it racism,
Yes.
is it not? How it is different from other types of racism. So this is a racism of our time. And I think it is, the other racism was based on blood, but this is based on culture. So it is something that can spread. The other racism would pass only through blood, but this is also, this can pass through contact or through belief. And that is why I think converts are scary, because they confuse these boundaries. So they don't let us see things in clear-cut racial terms, but they show us that things can be confusing. But I think if there was no racism, then converts wouldn't be a problem. The existing racism influences them.
Okay. if we look beyond, this is my last question, and then we will open to the audience. If we look beyond the German context, because you did research on conversion in Turkey. I mean, not to Islam, of course, but to Christianity. What is your opinion? What are parallels, but also differences and distinctions between the German discourse on conversion and other contexts?
Okay,
this
is a big question, but I have seen a parallel discourse. In Turkey, Christians are also really committed to describing that Christianity also fits for Turkey. They also have their own arguments. Oh, if you read the Bible and if you look at the food they eat, it is just like what they eat in Anatolia today. So they have other arguments that make Christianity really fit for Turkey, but that argument is there. This is not something alien. So desire to make it local. What is different there is that Christianity, even though there is fear of Christians and there's discrimination against Christians, Christians are not of lower rank. So it is not a fall of status like that. And also it is not visible. If you convert to Christianity, no one will just see it on the street.
If you wear a cross on your...
if you wear a cross, yeah. But there is nothing that requires their religion. In order to be Christian, they don't need to do anything that is visual. And also their conversion happens mostly through missionaries because there are not that many Christians. So the kind of tensions don't exist. In Turkish Christian churches, almost everyone is Turkish, and there are some Armenians also who converted to the Turkish-speaking, born-again Christianity. So there are, different dynamics. But there, the danger is also higher. There has been killings. It feels like a more transgressive act that requires little more courage. I mean, it's difficult to be a German Muslim, but I don't think day to day they fear death or being killed.
Very interesting points. And now, we would be happy to take questions and comments from the audience, and we would ask you to keep it short because we are many people here in the room. We have limited time, but please you and then you.
You probably don't have the numbers of young male German converts, but according to your impression, what percentage...
Sorry, would you take the mic, please?
What percentage of those young male German converts are motivated by theological or quasi-theological reasons, and what percentage is motivated by antagonism to their society, which means that they are either actually or potentially fighters for ISIS?
Okay.
Maybe we can
I'll
also, I would say we collect 2, 3, and then, so first sir here, and then here.
Conversion goes two ways. You can convert into Islam, and you can convert out of Islam. Could you give us a sense of the order of magnitude? There's 100,000 who convert into Islam, but your account would suggest that there would be many more who are converting out of Islam because of the stigmas and involved in being Islamic. So what is the order of magnitude there?
And here.
Yes, I'm listening.
So you have been talking about these individual Germans who have converted to Islam because of an individual spiritual journey. But I wonder if you have met any extremists as you were searching for these converts, and if you did, what did they have on their minds? Why did they convert to Islam?
Okay, thank you.
So, you answer, and then we collect the next question.
Okay, I haven't met a single person who converted out of theology. I met only one person who told me, I took the Torah, the Bible, the Quran, I read it, and then the Quran made most sense to me. But I talked to that person only once. My impression is that people first make a contact, and that contact opens their heart. It puts a curiosity, and they start learning about Islam, and they learn about it, it grows in their heart, and they convert. So it is, and as they learn, they start to like it. I also met many people, who would come to meetings for new Muslims, think about it, and say, okay, this is not for me. Theology plays a role, but at first it is always an individual contact that opens the heart. I haven't met anyone who converted out of antagonism. It is always associated with positive things. I met these people. Wow, I really was taken by their commitment to friendship. I was really taken by what they understand out of family. Wow, I was really impressed, but that even though he was really busy, he would take the time to pray. So it was always these moments of, wow, maybe there is something else in life that I'll think about that. It is never, oh, I hate German society, I'll become a Muslim. It's, almost never like that. The whole thing about, becoming an extremist, becoming an Islamic, fighter for the Islamic State, I haven't met these people because I did my research in the mosques, and this doesn't happen in the mosques. All research shows that all, I'm not an expert on radicalization, but, whenever stories appear, I, with great interest, I read them. And I see that almost always it happens in isolation. We have this one case in Germany several years ago, some Balkan background Muslim guy who went and shot American soldiers going to Afghanistan. For example, his story, he watched at Facebook some fake documentaries. They were actually a film showing American soldiers raping Afghani girls. He believed in that, went to the airport, asked soldiers, are you going to Afghanistan or coming back? He said he wasn't going to kill people who are coming back because it wouldn't help. And when people said we are going, he killed them. But he had no contact, he wasn't a mosque goer. He had friends definitely on Facebook. And he got, many, or these 3 girls in, the British girls, it happens at home in isolation. There is, what is in their minds? There are also people who worked with such people. They do not go there also, oh, I'll be evil, they also go there with an ideal. So it is also not the first time Europeans are going and fighting other people's wars. Lots of Europeans went to Latin America, they went to Spain, they joined other people's wars with some ideals. They really go there to save the world, make it better for Muslims. And we know that many of them are, surprised with the reality when they went there. They're disappointed. Some want to come back. They cannot come back. But anyway, it's a little bit other discussion. People, of course, convert out of Islam, but there is no place you go and register to say, I have converted out of Islam. Can you please write it down? And you can do it also in degrees. You can, and then what is Islam in Germany? You can leave your beliefs or not. No one can see it. But even if you are raging atheist, but you look a certain way and your name is a certain way, that you cannot leave behind. There is also that aspect of Islam in Europe that you cannot leave behind.
I saw some. Okay, so here and here and yeah, we start with both of them.
Thank you for your thoughts on this. I wanted to ask a question. You mentioned that there's not really an anti-German discourse in this way, but if we kind of take a few steps back and think about let's say the sort of, let's say, conceptual presuppositions or infrastructure. It struck me that at that level, the sort of Islam that you were describing was one that was heavily Christianized or heavily secularized. So in the sense that we distinguish between the religious ideals and the sort of cultured traditions, or even the sort of narrative kind of supersession, or you mentioned this idea of Islam coming to Germany. It's sort of Islam goes beyond, it advances in this Enlightenment way. Just the context. So I'm wondering, is there any sort of critique of those sort of presuppositions? In other words, is there any sort of critical discourse? I mean, you mentioned not a strong political antagonism, but is there any sort of discussion critical of Christian or secular modes of approaching whatever?
And then over there, please. Here, lady here.
I would like to know, you talked about the very negative reputation of Islam, even if people don't know who they are and what they do. Is there a connection between that and there's not a clear voice, or there's not enough people who are educated and who are intellectual Muslims who do not speak out, and there's a lack of people to admire or people to follow because they're not speaking, the intellectuals or there should be a greater or a stronger voice from the Islam community themselves against the radicals, the ISIS and so forth and so on.
Then in the back. Yes. And then you can.
Thank you for your dedicated research and for your graceful presentation. I just heard two different things, and I was going to try to get some clarity. First of all, the Salafists, are they accepting the converts? Because on one hand, the converts were kind of outcast to some of the communities they converted into, but it seemed like the Salafists didn't have that issue. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Okay, yeah, thank you
We
for this.
first, and then we collect the next.
Okay, yeah, great questions. I'll start with the last because, yeah, there are many different communities, and maybe in my talk I talked about all of them. Actually, Salafists are very accepting of converts, and they are, I try to think about why is it attractive, and what struck me when I went to Salafist mosques was this great diversity of people from all backgrounds sitting next to each other. More than sitting next to each other, actually marrying each other. For me, that is a huge sign that they really go beyond that, Somalian marrying an Arab, that's marrying a Latin American, Ethnic background really means nothing in Salafi mosques. They really go beyond that. And that is why I think their converts feel really comfortable, because it doesn't matter if you're Japanese, if you are Turkish. If you came there as a Turk, Arab, Malaysian, as a born Muslim, they tell you that there is so much you have to unlearn, because there are all these cultural traditions that come with your culture. You have to unlearn them, and you have to go back to the example of the Prophet Muhammad and his time. So it kind of plays an equalizing role. And at the same time, these Salafists probably provide a critique of this, what you have called maybe heavily Christianized or universalist European approach to religion. If we think about maybe if Tariq Ramadan represents that kind of approach, or if we think about if Muhammad Assad, I don't know if these names mean anything to you, represent a kind of a Europeanized an Islam that fits the European culture the best, Salafists say, who cares? I don't care if it is European, if it really fits the Enlightenment or not. I don't care at all. I just care that it fits the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad. So that is the critique of it. another kind of critique, now there are some people, who say, no, we need to embrace also the Turkish traditions. We also need to Arab traditions as well. But I mean, I'm sure there are people who know better than me, because I didn't spend that much time in Turkish mosques. I think overall this is a moment of purification of Islam. It is a little bit, I'll leave it there, because I think I don't feel qualified to talk about, how people do with the Turkish traditions. Why is there no intellectual voice against ISIS? I find myself resisting this question behind me, inside me, because I always hear that whenever a terrorist attack happens, whenever somewhere some Muslims do something bad, people always turn, you Muslims, why aren't you criticizing it? And there will always be many, many Muslims screaming, we don't see ourselves as part of it. We really hate this. This is horrible. This is giving us a bad name. I mean, in Berlin, people did tons of things. People did prayers on the streets. I mean, in Norway, Muslims made human chains around synagogues. I mean, people are doing, and then whatever they do, then people turn to them, you Muslims, why aren't you saying anything? I find that unfair, and it is a fight that you cannot win. So I think people are saying things. Many Muslims are saying things.
Okay, so the next questions, we will collect them. Where's the mic? Is here in the second row, and then over there, and then...
You said that there are as many converts to Islam in France and the UK and the US as there are in Germany, but you told a very German story, and you told the reactions of German society to converts. And I was wondering, to what extent is it different in France and the UK and the US? Has it to do with a different role of racism? Has it to do with a different relationship of religion to the state, or of religion to society? And what is the main characteristic of this difference?
You commented on how a lot of converts seem to react more strongly against discrimination than other Muslims, maybe because they weren't socialized into these sort of structural inequalities. So I was just wondering if you talked to any converts about their children, or how they were then dealing with having to sort of socialize their children into an expectation of racism.
And then behind you. There was a question. No?
It may be a stupid or naive question, but are you aware of any cases of double conversion? Let us say a person becomes a Muslim, and after some time he or she decides to become a Christian again. Sure. Yes, is it possible, at least theoretically, or is it a one-way street?
Okay, thank you again. Fantastic questions. Of course, many, endless, infinite possibilities are there. There is this category that social scientists call seekers. There are a lot of people who, through their lifetime, go through many religions. And I met people like that. Oh, first I tried this, then I tried that. Now I'm a Muslim, and I'm very happy in it. But who knows, maybe they'll go to something else. And I also met, I remember this one woman, she had a conversion ceremony. I said, congratulations, what brought you to Islam? My lines to research lines. She said, oh, it's great, I'm doing this for the second time. I said, oh, great, how is it? So she said, she had converted, but then she had some bad experiences. She was, she kind of fell outside of it in her heart, and then now she feels closer again. So I think all ways are possible. It's not a one-way street at all. Children, it's a great question, because now there are so many converts and they have children. I talked some of the children. in Berlin, different places might be different, but now in Berlin there is a significant community of converts that they socialize together and they have children, and their children can be German, they can be German Arab, I don't know, Latvian Arab, everything. And they try to make sure that these children spend time together. And among those children I asked, they said, yeah, to us it's not an issue at all. It never comes up. So it is possible that for future generations it will not be an issue, maybe. Let's hope. I'm an anthropologist, so I believe that an issue can be understood best only in its context. So in order, then I would have to, there are people who looked at converts in France, in the UK, in the US. For example, in France, I understand that the converts, I think the relations between Muslim and the mainstream society is more tense in France. I think it has to do with their colonial history. It's a much more politicized Muslim community than compared to, let's say, Turks in Germany. And then in that tense environment, converting is also a bigger statement. In the UK, we have a huge community of people of color converting to Islam. Lots of Jamaicans, other Caribbean people. In the US, also similarly, lots of African Americans convert to Islam. So all of those changes the dynamics, both what religion stands for, and I think what is really important is who are the communities, in what Muslim communities, how did they come here, how is their relationship to the mainstream society. So I think that determines also the meaning of conversion.
Okay, with regard to the time, I would say last round of questions. So please give us no questions, no more questions. Oh, okay, yes. So here. Please wait for the mic.
If colonialism plays a certain role in France in regard to converts to Muslims, why doesn't it play the same role in Britain, where colonialism had a very definite role, far greater, as well as in West Africa, where the Muslim community is very big?
Are there other questions? We'll collect them as well.
Okay.
So this was
Yeah. So it is the combination of different things, I think. Both colonialism and I guess the war with Algeria is so recent for the French case. And then this harsh secularism, let's say, in France. So these things combine. Whereas the UK, it has its obviously colonial history, but at the same time, the political atmosphere is more accommodating for religious difference. One has to look more into it. And in the US, it is also different. I know the US context a little bit better. There, both because Muslims, I think in the UK too, in the UK and in the US, there is a huge community of middle-class Muslims, which is lacking both in Germany and in France. So that hugely influences the perception of Islam. And in the US, also the choice and people shifting from religion to religion, a more given space for religious expression. Yeah, so I think several elements come together in shaping the relationships.
Okay, so I will take the privilege of the last question.
Yes, please.
Esra, in ethnographic works, the positionality of the researchers plays an important role. What was your experience with this? Was it easy for you to gain access to the community, to the converts, and were you perceived as a Muslim, a Turkish, a non-European researcher? Or what was what was it? Yeah, how was it? Was it easy or?
Okay. Access wasn't difficult. People were very welcoming. But in many of the mosques, there would be so many researchers. They would say, oh, here's the researcher's corner. You know, oh, it's so embarrassing. I don't want to be in the researcher's corner. I'm the real researcher here. You know, the communities were really sick of their negative depictions, so they really hope to have a person who will tell the truth. You know, they would say, we're telling you everything. Just please make sure to tell what I'm saying to you. You know, so that was their question. More was like this internal struggle. I was, you know, obviously as an ethnographer, you go and ask people questions and you want them to give you honest answers. And then they ask you questions and then they expect you to give honest answers. And, you know, I went there with a more sociological, anthropological curiosity. You know, I'm not a very spiritual person. You know, I see my spirituality as like a little candle. You know, if you like really do like that, it grows a little left on its own. It becomes a little, you know, a very tiny candle again. Yeah, so so that was hard, you know. So where is my spirituality? Of course, you know, something happens when you participate the prayers. You know, think about the afterlife a lot. You know, so. Yeah, it really is an interaction, and it is difficult. That brings you with yourself as well. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you.